The Great Hall of Nexus Prime had never seen such anger before. 12 species sat around the massive crystal table, each one more furious than the last. The humans had done it again. Another trade dispute had turned into a shooting match, and this time 3 Veltar ships were floating dead in space. Ambassador Kalphara slammed her 4-fingered hand on the smooth surface. Her blue skin had turned dark purple with rage. "Enough is enough," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "These humans cannot control themselves. They are like wild animals." The other council members nodded. The Zephyrians clicked, their mandibles in agreement. The crystal minds sent waves of shared thought that felt like cold disapproval. Even the peaceful Meridians, who usually tried to find middle ground, sat silent. "Every time we give them a chance, they mess it up," said Councillor Drath from the hegemony. His massive form cast shadows across half the table. "They fight over everything: resources, territory, trade routes. They even fight among themselves." Admiral Trosses of the Dominion pulled up holographic displays. "Look at their history," he said, pointing at the floating images. "Thousands of years of constant war. They only stopped fighting each other when they found us to fight instead." The evidence was clear. In just 50 years since first contact, humans had been involved in 17 separate conflicts. Some were small, like the mining dispute with the Outer Rim Collective. Others were bigger, like the 3-day battle over shipping lanes near the Vega system. None of them had been entirely the humans' fault, but somehow they always made things worse. Ambassador Jake Morrison sat alone at a smaller table. He was the only human present, and right now he felt very small. "Council members," he said, standing up slowly, "my people are not perfect, we know this. But we are trying to learn." "Trying?" Kalthara's voice rose higher. "Your species has had 50 years to learn." "How much more time do you need?" Jake looked around the room. These beings were ancient compared to humans. The Veltar had been spacefaring for 3,000 years. The crystal mines had existed for 10,000. To them, 50 years was nothing, but to humans it was 2 full generations. "We are young," Jake said. "We only reached the stars a century ago. You have had thousands of years to learn peace. And that is exactly why this must happen," said Elder Velmuth of the Crystal Mines. The ancient being's thoughts touched every mind in the room. Youth is not an excuse for violence. The vote was quick. 12 species, 1 decision. The humans would be isolated until they learned to behave. The silence protocol would be put in place around their entire solar system. No ships in or out, no communications, complete quarantine. "How long?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Until you prove you have changed," Kalthara said. 50 years, 100, maybe more. When you are ready to join civilized society, we will know." The barriers went up within days. Jake watched from the observation deck of Haven Station as the last human ships raced home. The quantum field generators were already in place, invisible walls that would keep his people trapped in their own small corner of space. President Helen Clark's face appeared on the emergency channel from Earth. Her eyes were red from crying. "Jake, what are we going to do?" "We survive," he said. "We learn, we become better than they think we can be." The last transmission cut off as the barrier sealed completely. Jake found himself alone on an alien station, the only human left outside. The quarantine. The station commander, a Veltar named Kess, approached him carefully. "You can stay here," Kess said. "You were not part of the vote." Jake shook his head. "My place is with my people." He climbed into his small shuttle and flew toward the barrier. The quantum field let him pass one last time, recognizing his human DNA. Behind him, the galaxy continued its business as if humanity had never existed. On Earth, people gathered in the streets. Some cried, some raged. Others just stared at the sky, wondering if they would ever see alien ships again. President Clark called an emergency session of the World Congress. "We have been judged and found wanting," she said to the assembled leaders. "But this is not the end. This is our chance to prove them wrong." Dr. Lisa Hamilton, the head of Earth Science Council, stood up. "They think we are too violent to join their galaxy." Maybe they are right. But maybe violence is not always wrong. Maybe sometimes the galaxy needs people who are willing to fight. The president nodded slowly. "We will use this time well." When we emerge from this silence, we will be stronger. We will be ready for whatever comes next. In the depths of space, the barriers hummed with energy. Earth and its colonies were now invisible to the rest of the galaxy. The humans were alone with their thoughts, their anger, and their determination. The Council had given them silence, thinking it would break their spirit. They had no idea what they had actually created. Time would tell if their decision was wise or if they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. 50 years had passed since the barriers went up. Earth looked different now. Where once there had been crowded cities choking on pollution, clean towers of glass and metal reached toward the sky. The oceans were blue again. The air was clean. But the biggest changes were not on Earth at all. Dr. Lisa Hamilton stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, floating in orbit around Mars. Below her, the red planet glowed with the lights of 100 cities. Rivers ran where there had once been only dust. Green forests covered what used to be empty plains. Mars was alive. "Hard to believe it took us this long," said Captain Chris Parker, joining her at the window. He commanded the defense fleet that protected the outer colonies. "We could have done this centuries ago," Lisa nodded. "We were too busy looking outward, too excited about alien technology and alien worlds. We never stopped to ask what we could build ourselves. The transformation had not been easy. The first 10 years after the silence began were the hardest. Many people fell into despair. Some wanted to break the barriers by force. Others suggested surrendering completely, sending signals begging for forgiveness. But President Helen Clark had held firm. "We will not break," she had said during the dark early years. "We will bend, we will learn, but we will not break." The breakthrough came from Dr. Amy Foster, a quantum physicist who had been working on dimensional theory. Trapped without alien technology to study, she had turned inward, exploring the deepest laws of physics. What she found changed everything. "Reality has layers," she explained to the World Science Council. "We have been living on just one layer, like ants crawling on the surface of a sphere. But there are other layers, other dimensions we can access." Her first experiment had been simple. A small probe that could slip between the layers of space, appearing and disappearing at will. Then came bigger tests. Ships that could hide in dimensional folds. Weapons that could strike from outside normal space, but the real revolution was in biology. Dr. Kevin Ross had taken Amy's dimensional theories and applied them to human consciousness. "The mind is not just electrical patterns in the brain," he said. "It is a quantum structure that exists partially outside normal space." The first successful consciousness transfer happened in year 35 of the silence. An old man named Danny White, dying of cancer, had his mind carefully copied into a quantum matrix. His body died, but his consciousness lived on, transferred. Into a new clone body grown from his own cells, death became optional. Not for everyone, and not without cost, but possible. Those who chose it could live for centuries, their minds backed up and restored in new bodies when the old ones wore out. The galaxy had given humanity 50 years to think about what they had done wrong. Instead, they had spent that time becoming something new. Captain Lavastone piloted her ship through the dimensional fold space around Jupiter's moons. Her vessel, the Guardian, existed in a state between realities. To outside observers, it was invisible. To those inside, normal space looked like a ghost world they could see but not touch. "Patrol complete," she reported to Admiral Jake Morrison. He had returned from his exile 20 years ago, his consciousness transferred into a body that would not age. "All colonies are secure." The colonies. That was another change the Council had not expected. Humanity had not just survived in their solar system, they had thrived. Mars was fully terraformed. The moons of Jupiter hosted millions of people. Even Venus was slowly being transformed, its crushing atmosphere tamed by machines that worked for decades without rest. Europa had become a research center, where scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Titan housed the military. Academies where a new generation learned to fight wars in multiple dimensions. The asteroid belt was home to massive factories that built things the galaxy had never seen. Dr. Helen Murphy, who had taken over as head of the Science Council, often wondered what the aliens would think if they could see inside the barriers. "We are not the same species they locked away," she told her staff. We are something new. The new humans were stronger, smarter, and could live for centuries. But more than that, they had learned patience. The old human desire for quick results had been burned away by 50 years of isolation. Now they thought in decades and centuries instead of years. General Pete Adams commanded the new Earth Defense Force from his base on Phobos. His ships were unlike anything that had existed before. They could phase in and out of reality, strike from impossible angles, and disappear before anyone could respond. The question is not whether we are strong enough to break the barriers, he told his officers. The question is whether we want to. Some did want to break out. The younger generation, born after the silence began, were curious about the galaxy. Beyond, they had grown up on stories of alien worlds and strange creatures. But the older generation remembered the vote that had condemned them. Let them keep their barriers, President Carol Davis said during a cabinet meeting. She was the third president since the silence began, elected by people who had never seen an alien face. We will find our own way out when we are ready. The way came from Amy Foster's latest breakthrough. She had learned to fold space in ways that made the barriers meaningless. Her ships could step outside the normal universe entirely, travel through the void between realities, and emerge anywhere they wanted. The first test was a simple probe sent to the edge of the galaxy. It bypassed the barriers as if they were not there. The second test was a manned scout ship that visited the ruins of an ancient civilization. The barriers never even noticed. We can leave any time we want, Amy reported to the council. The barriers only work in normal space. In dimensional fold space, they might as well be made of paper, but humanity was not ready to leave yet. They had learned the value of patience. The galaxy had taught them a hard lesson about acting without thinking. Now they would take their time and do things right. Dr. Mike Turner, commanding a deep space scout ship, watched the galaxy from the safety of dimensional fold space. The aliens went about their business, never knowing that human eyes were watching. Trade fleets moved between systems. Patrol ships kept the peace. Everything looked normal, but Mike had been trained to see deeper. Something was wrong out there. The galaxy was changing, and not for the better. Dark currents moved beneath the surface of galactic civilization. Old alliances were breaking down, new powers were rising. Maybe, he thought as he prepared his report, the galaxy needs us more than we need them. 100 years had passed since the barriers went up around human space. The galaxy had forgotten what humans looked like. Children of alien species learned about them only in history classes as a footnote about a violent race that had been quarantined long ago, but forgetting humans had consequences no one expected. Ambassador Kelthera, now ancient even by Veltar standards, stood in the ruins of her capital city. The beautiful crystal spires that had reached toward the sky for thousands of years were now melted slag. The gardens where her people had meditated for generations were filled with the bodies of the dead. The Zephyrian plague had come without warning. A ship had arrived claiming to be traders, seeking rare minerals. By the time the Veltar realized what was happening, the bioweapon was already spreading through their atmosphere. How many? Kelthera asked her aide, a young Veltar named Pezes who had survived only because he was off-world when the attack began. 90% of the home population is gone, Pezes said, his voice breaking. The colony worlds are quarantined, but the plague adapts faster than our medicine can keep up. Kelthera closed her eyes. In her youth, she had been so certain that humans were the galaxy's greatest threat. They had been violent, unpredictable, quick to anger. But they had never done anything like this. Even in their worst conflicts, humans had fought for reasons, territory, resources, ideology. They had never killed simply for the joy of watching things die. The Zephyrians were different. They called themselves the Collective now, and their message was simple. Only the strong deserved to live. Everyone else was just wasting space and resources. Any word from the council? Kelthera asked. They are still debating, Pezes replied. The hegemony wants to negotiate. The Dominion suggests we find a way to appease them. The crystal mines are running probability calculations. Kelthera felt something she had not experienced in decades, rage, pure, burning rage. While they debate, entire species are dying. The collective had started small, a few raids on isolated colonies. Attacks that could be explained as piracy or territorial disputes. But as their confidence grew, so did their ambitions. The outer rim species fell first. Small, weak civilizations that could not defend themselves. Then the middle powers began to disappear. The pattern was always the same. A ship would arrive with an offer to trade or negotiate. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the bioweapon was already spreading. Viruses that rewrote DNA, turning victims into mindless drones or simply melting their bodies from the inside. Counselor Drath of the hegemony had seen the reports, but even his massive intellect struggled to understand the scale of the threat. It makes no sense, he told the emergency council session. What do they gain from genocide? They gain space, said Admiral Trosses. Empty worlds to colonize, resources without competition. A galaxy where only they decide who lives and who dies. Elder Velmuth of the Crystal Mines had been silent for days, processing information at speeds that made organic minds dizzy. When he finally spoke, his thoughts carried a weight that made everyone in the council chamber stop breathing. We have made an error, the ancient being said. In our calculations of galactic stability, we always included humanity as a variable. Their chaos, their violence, their unpredictability. We thought removing them would make the galaxy more peaceful. It has, Drath protested. We have had 100 years of relative peace. No, Velmuth replied. We have had 100 years of stagnation. Humanity was never the galaxy's greatest threat. They were its immune system. The council chamber fell, silent as the implications sank in. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had maintained balance through a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and careful negotiations. Every species had their role to play. The Veltar were the diplomats. The Crystal Mines were the thinkers. The Dominion provided military strength, and humanity had been the wild card. Too unpredictable to ignore, too stubborn to suppress entirely. They had forced everyone else to stay alert, to be ready for unexpected challenges. Their very presence had kept the galaxy's immune system strong. Without them, the galaxy had grown soft. Captain Amy Foster phased her scout ship back into normal space near the edge of collective territory. What she saw there made her stomach turn. A dozen worlds that had once hosted thriving civilizations were now silent. The collective's bioweapons had done their work well. Command, this is Scout 7, she transmitted back toward human space. The Meridian system is gone. Complete extinction event. No survivors detected. The Meridians had been one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They had never raised a weapon against anyone. Their art and music had been treasured by dozens of worlds. Now they were just empty planets orbiting a star that no longer had anyone to appreciate its light. Amy's quantum sensors detected movement in the system. Collective ships were already moving in, beginning the process of colonization. They worked with mechanical efficiency, stripping away any trace that the Meridians had ever existed. They are not just killing, Amy reported, they are erasing. As if these species never existed at all? Back on Earth, President Carol Davis convened an emergency meeting of the Inner Council. The room was small, containing only the dozen people who made the most important decisions for humanity. Most of them were old enough to remember the time. Before the barriers, when humans had been part of the galactic community, we have a choice to make, the president said. We can stay hidden and safe behind our barriers while the galaxy burns, or we can act. Admiral Jake Morrison, his consciousness, now housed in his third body, studied the intelligence reports. The collective has taken 47 systems in the past 10 years. At their current rate, they will control a quarter of the galaxy within 50 years. Not our problem, said General Pete Adams. The galaxy made its choice when they locked. US away, let them deal with the consequences. Dr. Amy Foster disagreed. They made their choice based on what we were, not what we could become. We are not the same species they quarantined. Exactly, said Dr. Helen Murphy. We have grown beyond their understanding. We have technology they cannot imagine. We have learned patience they will never possess. The question is not whether we can stop the collective. The question is whether we should. President Davis looked around the room at faces that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. What would our ancestors say? They would say that genocide is wrong, Admiral Morrison replied immediately. They would say that we have a duty to protect the innocent. Even after the galaxy rejected us, especially then, we have become something better than what we were. This is our chance to prove it. The vote was close, but the decision was clear. Humanity would act, not as conquerors or saviors, but as gardeners. They would tend the galaxy as they had learned to tend their own worlds. And if that meant pruning away the parasites that threatened the garden's health, so be it. Captain Danny White received his orders while patrolling the outer edge of collective space. His ship, the Redemption, existed in the space between dimensions invisible to normal sensors. He had been watching the collective fleet for weeks, learning their patterns, studying their weaknesses. All units, this is command, came the transmission. From Admiral Morrison. Operation Greenhouse is authorized. Begin Phase 1, Danny smiled grimly. After 100 years of silence, humanity was about to speak again. The galaxy would listen, whether it wanted to or not. The collective fleet hung in space like a cloud of death around the peaceful world of Cathara. 3,000 ships surrounded the planet, their bioweapons charged and ready. Admiral Kesht H stood on his command deck, watching the readings from the planet below with satisfaction. Another clean world, he said to his aide, clicking his mandibles in pleasure. Once we clear away the current infestation, this will make an excellent breeding ground for our young. The Ketharam people had been trying to surrender for 3 days, broadcasting messages of submission on every frequency. It did not matter. The collective had no interest in slaves or subjects. They wanted empty worlds, not populated ones. Beginning atmospheric deployment, the weapons officer reported. Bioweapon dispersal in 30 minutes, Kest nodded. It would be over quickly. The virus would sweep through the population in hours, breaking down their genetic structure from the inside. Within days, the planet would be ready for new inhabitants. The first sign that something was wrong came from the sensor operator. Admiral, I am detecting an anomaly in Sector 7. What kind of anomaly? Unknown, sir. The sensors show empty space, but there are gravitational readings that suggest something large is there. Kesht frowned. Sensor ghosts were not uncommon, especially near planets with strong magnetic fields. Run a full spectrum scan. The results made no sense. According to every instrument on the ship, Sector 7 was empty. But the gravitational readings were unmistakable. Something massive was hiding there, something that existed but could not be seen. Then space folded, and the impossible became real. Captain Danny White materialized his ship in normal space for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to scan the collective fleet, identify their command ship, and broadcast a message on all frequencies. This is Captain Danny White of the Terran Defense Fleet. His voice echoed through every collective ship in the system. You will withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences. The message sent shockwaves through the collective command structure, Terran, human, the quarantined species that had been locked away for a century. It was impossible. Admiral Kesht H recovered first. Impossible. The humans are sealed in their system. This must be some kind of deception. Scanning the transmission source, the sensor operator said, his voice shaking. Admiral, the gravitational signature is consistent with a vessel massing approximately 2 million tons. But our sensors still show empty space. Fire on the source location, Kesht H ordered. Whatever is hiding there, destroy it. A dozen collective ships opened fire, filling space with energy beams and kinetic projectiles. The weapons passed through. Empty space and struck nothing. But the gravitational anomaly remained. Danny's voice came again, calm and patient. That was unwise. The Redemption emerged from dimensional fold space directly above Kasht's flagship. The collective had never seen anything like it. The human ship existed in normal space but somehow looked wrong, as if it was not entirely there. Danny fired once. A focused beam of quantum energy struck the flagship's main hull. The ship did not explode. Instead, it simply disappeared. Chaos erupted throughout the collective fleet. Their command ship had vanished completely, leaving behind only empty space and confused sensor readings. Command ship displaced to coordinates 7-7- Mark 5, Danny broadcast calmly. Dimensional fold location approximately 60 light-years. From here, they are unharmed but stranded. Anyone else who wishes to test human technology is welcome to join them. The collective fleet found their missing flagship exactly where Danny said it would be, floating helplessly in empty space far from any inhabited system. Every system on the ship was offline, but the crew was alive and uninjured. Kess stared at his dead instruments in horror. What did they do to us? His science officer, a young Zephyrian named Veshk, studied the readings with growing fear. They moved us through folded space, Admiral. Displaced our entire ship across 60 light-years in an instant. The technology required for such a feat is beyond our understanding. Back at Kethara, the remaining collective ships faced an impossible choice. Retreat and look weak, or continue the attack against an enemy they could not see or understand. Some chose to retreat. Dozens of ships activated their hyperdrive and fled the system, but the majority stayed, driven by a combination of pride and disbelief. Attack pattern Gamma, ordered Sub-Admiral Desara, taking command of the remaining fleet. Saturate the entire area with fire. The collective ships unleashed everything they had. Energy weapons, kinetic bombardments, plasma charges, and exotic matter warheads filled space with destructive force. Surely nothing could survive such an assault, but the human ships were not there to be hit. They existed in the spaces between reality, watching the fireworks display from perfect safety. Captain Lavra Stone, commanding the Guardian, watched the collective's desperate attack from dimensional fold space. Command, this is Guardian. The collective fleet is expending approximately 70% of their ammunition on empty space. Let them tire themselves out, came Admiral Morrison's reply. Then show them what real firepower looks like. When the collective's weapons finally fell silent, the human ships began to appear. Not all at once, but one by one, materializing at impossible angles and distances. Each ship looked different, as if they had been designed by people who understood physics in ways the galaxy had forgotten. The Redemption appeared directly behind this Ara-S command ship. The Guardian materialized above the bioweapon carriers. The Justice phased into reality in the middle of the fleet formation. This is your final warning, Danny's voice echoed through space. Withdraw from this system or be removed. The Sara made the wrong choice. All ships, focus fire on the human vessels. The collective fleet opened fire again, but this time the humans fired back. They did not use the crude energy weapons or kinetic bombardments that dominated galactic warfare. Instead, they used tools that the galaxy had never imagined. Ships found themselves displaced through folded space, scattered across empty systems like leaves in a storm. Weapon systems simply stopped working as their quantum states were altered from a distance. Some vessels discovered that their artificial gravity had been reversed, leaving crews floating helplessly against their ceiling. Not a single collective ship was destroyed. Not a single crew member was killed. But within 30 minutes, the entire fleet was scattered, disabled, or stranded. The few ships that still functioned were given a simple choice: leave or join their companions in exile. They left. On the planet below, the Ketharam people watched in amazement as the death fleet that had surrounded their world simply vanished. Some ships fled into hyperspace. Others disappeared entirely, displaced to distant corners of the galaxy. Who were they? Asked Prime Minister Velton, staring at the orbital scans in disbelief. Unknown, replied his science advisor. The ships appeared to be of human design, but humans have been quarantined for over a century. Velton considered this. The humans had been legends even before their quarantine. Stories of their unpredictability and violence had spread throughout the galaxy, but the beings who had just saved his world showed neither trait. Broadcast a message, he ordered. Thank whoever just saved us and ask if there is anything we can do to repay them. The answer came quickly, broadcast from empty space in a voice that was distinctly human but somehow older and more patient than the humans of legend. No thanks necessary, Danny's voice said. Just live in peace and treat your neighbors well. That is payment enough? The human ships vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving behind only confused collective survivors and a planet full of people who had just witnessed the impossible. News of the incident spread quickly through the galaxy's communication networks. The quarantined humans had somehow broken free of their barriers and intervened in galactic affairs. but they had not conquered or claimed territory. They had simply made it clear that the wholesale slaughter of innocents would not be tolerated. The galaxy was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The violent, unpredictable humans of a century ago had become something else entirely, something patient and powerful beyond imagining, and they were no longer content to stay locked away, while evil ran free. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going for 6 days straight. Representatives from all 12 member species sat around the crystal table, but for the first time in 3,000 years, none of them felt safe. Ambassador Kelthera looked older than her 800 years. The plague that had devastated her people had been stopped, but the scars remained. Half the Veltar homeworld was still uninhabitable, and their colonies lived in constant fear of another collective attack. "The reports keep coming in," said Admiral Trosses, his massive Dominion frame hunched over a datapad. 47 collective fleets have been scattered across the galaxy. Not destroyed, mind you, scattered. Their ships appear in random systems, completely disabled, but with crews intact. Counselor Drath of the Hegemony accessed his neural implants, reviewing the tactical data. The humans are using displacement, technology we cannot comprehend. They can move entire fleets through folded space instantaneously. It is not just the technology, added Elder Velmuth of the Crystal Mines. It is the restraint. Any other species with such power would use it. For conquest, the humans use it only to stop genocide. The evidence was overwhelming. In every system where the collective had attempted extermination, human ships had appeared to stop them, not to conquer the worlds for themselves, but simply to prevent the slaughter. The rescued populations were left to govern themselves while the attackers were relocated to empty systems far from inhabited space. "They have created a new form of warfare," observed scientist Prime Kellara of the Research Collective. "Non-lethal but completely effective. How do you fight an enemy that can simply remove your entire fleet from the battlefield without firing a shot?" Ambassador Kelthera stood slowly, her aged joints protesting the movement. "Perhaps the question is not how to fight them, but whether we should." The chamber fell silent. The suggestion that the Council should not oppose the humans was unprecedented. "They saved my people," Kelthera continued. "When the collective plague was spreading through our atmosphere, human ships appeared and somehow neutralized the bioweapon. They asked for nothing in return. They claimed no territory. They simply left. After ensuring we could treat the survivors, they also violated galactic law," protested Counselor Yeshtar of the Trade Federation. "The quarantine was legally imposed by this council. They have broken containment without permission. Laws that allow genocide are not worth following." Kelthera replied sharply. Admiral Trosses pulled up holographic displays showing the current galactic situation. "Like it or not, the humans have fundamentally changed the balance of power. The collective threat is neutralized. Their fleets are scattered and their bioweapons have been somehow rendered inert. 6 species facing extinction have been relocated to protected systems." "Protected by whom?" demanded Drath. "By the humans, apparently," Trosses replied. "They have established what they call sanctuary zones around threatened populations. Any ship entering those zones with hostile intent simply disappears." The data was staggering. In less than 6 months, human intervention had reshaped the entire galaxy. The collective's expansion had been stopped cold. Several smaller aggressive species had withdrawn to their home systems after their fleets were mysteriously relocated. Trade routes that had been closed due to piracy were now safe again. "They are gardening," said Velmuth suddenly. "The humans are treating the galaxy like a garden, removing the weeds and protecting the flowers." Counselor Drath's massive intellect struggled with the implications. But who gave them the right to decide what species live or die? Who gave the collective that right? Kelthera shot back. "At least the humans are preserving life instead of destroying it." A new voice entered the discussion. Captain Lavarstone's image appeared in the chamber's holographic display, transmitted from somewhere in deep space. The human looked exactly as humans had looked a century ago, but there was something different about her. A patience and confidence. That spoke of vast experience. "Council members," Lavra said politely, "I hope you do not mind the intrusion, but we felt it was time for a direct conversation. The security systems should have prevented any unauthorized transmission from reaching the council chamber. The fact that the humans could bypass them so easily was terrifying. "How did you break containment?" Admiral Trosses demanded. "We did not break anything," Lover replied calmly. "Your barriers still exist, we simply learned to work around them. Dimensional fold space makes your quantum barriers irrelevant." Elder Velmuth's ancient mind raced through possibilities. "You have been watching us for how long?" "Since the barriers went up," Lover admitted. "We needed to understand what was happening in the galaxy while we were learning to become better than we were." "And what did you learn?" asked Kelthra. Laura's expression grew sad. "We learned that the galaxy is much more fragile than we thought. Without someone willing to fight for the innocent, evil spreads like a disease. The collective was just the first symptom. What do you want from us?" Counselor Drath asked. "Nothing," Lover replied, surprising everyone. "We do not need your approval, your technology, or your trade agreements. We have built our own civilization, better than anything the galaxy has seen. Then why reveal yourselves at all?" "Because the garden needs tending," Lavra said simply. "Species like the collective will always exist. If good people do nothing, evil triumphs. We cannot stand by and watch genocide while we have the power to stop it." Admiral Trosses leaned forward. "Are you threatening us?" "Not at all," Lavra replied. "We are simply informing you of the new reality. The galaxy now has gardeners. We will not conquer or rule, but we will not allow the wholesale slaughter of innocents either." "And if we object?" asked Drath. Laura's smile was patient and sad. "Then you object?" "That is your right, but it will not change what we do." The transmission ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. For 3,000 years, they had been the ultimate authority in the galaxy. Now they were faced with a species that simply ignored their authority while somehow making the galaxy safer. "What do we do?" whispered Counselor Tar.kl Tahara. Looked around the chamber at beings who had once seemed so wise and powerful. "We adapt," she said finally. "The humans have become something we never imagined. They are not the violent primitives we quarantined. They are something new." "They are what we could have been," added Velmuth sadly. "If we had chosen growth over stagnation, courage over comfort." The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. 7 species voted to maintain the barriers and demand human compliance with galactic law. 5 voted to recognize the new reality and work with humanity to maintain galactic peace, but the vote did not matter. As Lavra had said, human actions would not change based on council approval. The barriers remained in place around human space, but they were meaningless now. Human ships moved freely through the galaxy, appearing wherever innocent lives were. Threatened, the collective tried one more major offensive, assembling a fleet of 5,000 ships to attack the Crystal Mind home system. They arrived to find human vessels waiting for them. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Ships that existed in folded space, commanded by beings who had learned patience and wielded power beyond imagination. The entire collective fleet was relocated to a distant galaxy, given enough supplies to survive but far from any inhabited worlds. The crystal mines were left in peace, and a clear message was sent to anyone else. Considering genocide as a solution to their problems, the galaxy had new guardians now. Patient, powerful, and completely committed to preventing the extinction of innocence. The council could debate and vote and pass laws, but the real power in the galaxy now belonged to the species they had tried to silence, and in the depths of space, human ships continued their eternal patrol, gardeners tending a galaxy that was slowly learning to bloom. The barriers around human space flickered once and then disappeared forever. Not because the Galactic Council had deactivated them, but because humanity no longer saw the point in pretending they were trapped. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood once again in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime, but everything had changed. The same crystal table, the same floating city among the stars, but the beings seated around it looked smaller somehow. Less certain, less in control. 101 years. Jake said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "That is how long you kept us in silence." Elder Kelthra, now the oldest living member of the council, could barely meet his eyes. The centuries weighed heavily on her frame, but it was guilt that bent her shoulders more than age. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake's answer was simple and devastating. "Nothing." He gestured to a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Green zones marked areas under human protection. Yellow zones showed regions where potential conflicts were being monitored. Red zones marked the locations where aggressive species had been relocated after attempting genocide. "We do not need your approval," Jake continued. "We do not need your technology. We certainly do not need your permission to do what is right." Counselor Drath of the hegemony struggled to understand. "But you were always seeking our acceptance before. You wanted to join our civilization." "That was before," Jake replied. "Before we learned what your civilization really was. Before we discovered that your peace was built on turning away from injustice. Before we realized that your wisdom was really just fear of making hard choices." The words hit like physical blows. For 3,000 years, the Council had prided itself on maintaining galactic peace through careful diplomacy and measured responses. Now they were being told it was all cowardice. "The collective killed billions while you debated," Jake said, his voice growing harder. "The Outer Rim species were exterminated while you held committee meetings. 6 entire civilizations were wiped out while you calculated the political cost of intervention. Admiral Trosses tried to defend their actions. We cannot police the entire galaxy. There are limits to what is possible. Are there?" Jake asked, because we seem to be managing it just fine. The numbers were undeniable. Since human intervention began, galactic violence had dropped by 80%. Piracy was almost extinct. No species had been exterminated in over 2 years. Trade flowed freely along routes that had been war zones for decades. "How many ships do you have?" asked Counselor Yeshtar of the Trade Federation. "Enough," Jake replied. "How many people?" "Enough." "What is your technology based on? Does it matter?" The Council was learning the frustration of dealing with a species that no longer cared about their opinions. Every question was met with polite but unhelpful answers. Every demand was simply ignored. Elder Velmuth of the Crystal Mines had been silent through most of the session, his ancient consciousness processing the implications of humanity's transformation. When he finally spoke, his thoughts carried the weight of millennia. "You have become something we did not expect," he said. "Something we could not have imagined." "Yes," Jake agreed. "You wanted us to become more civilized, more like you. Instead, we became something entirely different. What are you now?" Jake considered the question carefully. "We are what we always had the potential to become. Patient instead of impulsive. Thoughtful instead of reactive. But still willing to fight when fighting is necessary." "And you believe it is necessary to police the galaxy?" "I believe it is necessary to protect the innocent," Jake corrected. "The galaxy can govern itself however it wishes. We will not interfere with trade disputes or territorial negotiations or political conflicts. But we will not stand by while entire species are exterminated for sport." Captain Lavra Stone materialized in the chamber, her image broadcast from a ship that existed in folded space. "The Council is welcome to continue governing," she said. "In fact, we encourage it. Civilization needs laws and structures and careful consideration of complex issues. But civilization also needs guardians." "Guardians you appointed yourselves to be," Drath pointed out. "Who else was going to do it?" Lavra asked simply. "You had 3,000 years to stop genocide and never managed it. We have stopped it in 3 years. The truth was uncomfortable but undeniable. The galaxy was safer now than it had been in centuries. Not because of better laws or more careful diplomacy, but because there were finally consequences for attempting to wipe out entire species. What happens to us now?" asked Kelthra. "You continue as you always have," Jake replied. "Make laws. Negotiate treaties, manage trade disputes. Do all the things you do well. But know that there are some lines that cannot be crossed. And if we disagree with where you draw those lines?" Jake's smile was patient but implacable. "Then you disagree? That is your right, but it will not change what we do." Dr. Amy Foster appeared next to Lavra, her consciousness transmitted from a research station that existed partially outside normal space. "We are not your enemies," she said gently. We are not even your competitors. We are simply gardeners in a very large garden. Gardeners who can reshape reality itself, Admiral Trosses muttered. Reality was always more flexible than you believed, Amy replied. You simply chose not to explore its possibilities. The session continued for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Council could debate and vote and pass resolutions, but they no longer controlled the galaxy's destiny. That responsibility had passed to beings who had learned patience the hard way and wielded power with the wisdom that only comes from suffering. As the formal session ended, Ambassador Kelthra approached Jake privately. The ancient Veltar looked up at the human who seemed both familiar and alien. Do you hate us? She asked quietly. Jake considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. You taught us the most valuable lesson we ever learned. What lesson was that? That good intentions are not enough. That wisdom without courage is just elaborate cowardice. That someone has to be willing to act when action is needed, regardless of the political cost. We thought we were protecting the galaxy from your violence. You were protecting yourselves from having to make hard choices, Jake corrected gently. You used our violence as an excuse to avoid your own responsibilities. Kelthra felt tears beginning to form in her ancient eyes. What have we become? You have become what you always were, Jake replied. Careful, thoughtful, wise administrators. The galaxy needs administrators, but it also needs people willing to fight for what is right. And you are those people now? We are trying to be. As Jake's image faded from the chamber, the council members sat in silence. They had gotten exactly what they asked for a century ago. Humanity had become more mature, more thoughtful, more patient. They simply had not realized that maturity sometimes meant taking responsibility for protecting those who could not protect themselves. In the depths of space, Captain Danny White smiled as his ship returned to patrol duty. The galaxy was vast and full of potential threats, but it was also full of wonders worth protecting. Humanity had found its purpose at last, not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians of life itself. The silence was over. The real work was just beginning. And in systems throughout the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for centuries began to sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, patient guardians kept watch.